and welcome to FlyBoyz. A couple days ago in FlyBoyz, I did a post on the Martin B-10 bomber that I'm currently building. The primary subject of that post had to do with the fabrication of the wing ribs. And in that post, I mentioned how I've since then finished the outer wing panels, constructing them, but that I ran into a few issues in the process of doing so, and that I would talk about them in this next post here. I felt that the issues were easier to describe in a video rather than trying to write them up and have you guys slog through a long, boring read. So that's why we're doing this video post here. I did run into several issues because of the taper that the outer wing panels have, and that's what I primarily want to focus on in the video. So at this point, we're going to go over to the workbench, and I will show you the wing in its current state and talk about the issues that I had. Okay, we're over here at the building bench, and this is the current state of the wing build for the B-10 bomber. What we're looking at here in the center of the picture is the wing center panel, which was the focus of an earlier FlyBoyz post. And at this point, I have completed both outer wing panels. You can see the left wing panel here, which is currently unsheeted at the top, and scrolling over to the right wing panel, which I just finished sheeting that. The overall wing length is 52 7/8 inches long, so let's just call that 53 inches. And currently, the weight on everything you're looking at here is about 14 ounces. So we're still under a pound for what you're looking at here. The wing is very, very solid. It's a good, strong build, and I'm very pleased with that. And it's actually a pleasure working with a big, strong wing like this compared to some of the smaller free-flight planes that I've been working on before. But with that, having seen the overall wing, let me show you a close-up of some of the issues that I ran into. So the first issue that I encountered has to do with the holes in the wing ribs for the lead-out wires. As you can see, the back of the wing is tapered in, and the front of the wing is also tapered in. So the wing has a double taper on it. I followed religiously the position of the lead-out holes on the plans, and as you can see, the holes for the rear lead-out line lined up perfectly between the outer panel and the inner panel. Here's the joint between the two panels, and these holes lined up perfectly. But the holes for the leading edge lead-out wire did not line up. They go straight through the center section, and then they tapered off through the front of the wing, but they didn't make a straight line. The lead-out wires would have ended up kinking and being offset at an angle at this joint here and then going back. And obviously we can't have that on a control line plane. So I had to reposition and remake holes for the lead-out wire at the front of the plane so that it would have a straight line for that lead-out wire going all the way out. I'm not sure why the plans showed the holes in this position. I think the designer just wanted to keep a set distance here, and that ended up in them going back at an angle instead of straight out due to the taper. I'm not sure what the issue was, but I had to re-drill new holes for the lead-out wire. But that still left me in a situation where I was concerned about the lead-out wires getting caught or working themselves into these holes if there was any little angles on them. You need your lead-out wires to be totally straight going out so they're not cutting into the rib holes. And so I decided to use plastic tubes, such as you see here on this one, to help keep the guide the lead-out wires straight through the wing and keep them from cutting into the ribs. This rear one is really not an issue, like I said, but the front one was. And I'll come back in just a moment and show you what it looks like with that in there. Okay, I've now got the lead out tube in place for the front lead out wire. I personally myself have never used this sort of a thing, a guide, a tube guide for lead out wires, but I thought that it would be necessary in this case, given the potential for the lead out wires to cut into the rib holes. And then in reading over the build instructions, which are pretty sparse for this plane, but in reading them over again, I did find one sentence reference in the instructions to doing exactly what I've done, and that is using plastic tubes as guides for the lead out wires. So you can see this tube is in place here, and it exits out, and it exits out through the leading edge. This one exits out under the rear bottom skin of the plane, and I'll talk about that next. Okay, I have the wing turned upside down, and you can see here where the two plastic tubes for the lead out wires exit the plane. The rear lead out wire exits here through the bottom sheeting of the wing and out, and that does not look like there'd be any issue whatsoever. The front one, however, exits out of the leading edge of the wing. Now the plans did show that, however they had it exiting further back here, but because of my having to reposition the holes for the lead out wires, it moved the exit point up the leading edge to here. And so these will be dressed up, and you really won't see these tubes hanging out like this when I'm all said and done. But that's the arrangement I had to do. And getting this pass through the leading edge to line up was a bear. Let me show you what I mean on that. Okay, here we are with a once again a top view of where these two plastic lead out wire guides exit the wing. Again, the one for the rear wire is not really an issue. It just nice and gracefully exits out through the lower skin of the wing. But the front one, it was a matter of coming up with a compound angle, if you will, where it had to be had to keep this guide as straight as possible going out, and I had to also figure out where on the vertical it exited out through the leading edge. So it took a bit of probing and trial and error to find that position where it exited out of the leading edge, and then I used this big file that I've been pointing with to rasp out the hole big enough for that plastic tube to go into, and ultimately ended up with this sort of an arrangement exiting out of the leading edge of the wing. Again, this will all be dressed up and look a lot nicer on the finished plane, but it took a bit of finagling to get this to the point where it exited and keeping the lead out wire in basically a straight line. What I will do next is I will permanently glue in these plastic tubes, and then we'll be ready to feed the lead out guides or wires through them. Another issue that I had was, despite following the plans 100% religiously to the exact cutout outlines of the various ribs and leading and trailing edges, once everything was put together, they didn't line up correctly. As you can see, the joint here for this center section and this taper is a pretty sloppy joint here, and it was the same on the other side over here. This joint is a pretty sloppy joint, and that's going to need a lot of dressing up. It was similarly, but not as bad, on the trailing edges. This one didn't quite line up correctly, and the same with this side over here. It didn't totally line up correctly. So those will be fairly easy to trim up, but you can see that the ribs themselves are of different lengths. These ribs are supposed to match in length, but they don't. And I had to do a lot of trimming on the ribs all the way down the taper to get them to fit in precisely the way that they were supposed to fit in. So I was a little disappointed by following the plans and then having these front edges, leading edges, not line up by this, but I'll clean that up. Another issue that I had, but it wasn't a big one, was the trailing edge of the outer wing panels. There's a slight taper in the width of the outer edges, and you can't really pick it up in the plans, but there is a difference in the width here versus a difference in the width here. And so I already had these trailing edges all cut up and what have you, and I had to run them back through the saw because it's fairly thick wood in order to get a taper that went from wide here to narrower here. And again, looking at the plans, it's not really obvious, but it is about a 1/4 inch difference, and so I had to dress up those trailing edges accordingly. Had the same issue, only a lot worse, on the leading edge. Okay, here on the leading edge, I had the same sort of an issue with the taper, and that is the leading edge was constructed at this one width throughout the whole length of it. But what happens in actuality is it's wide here, but then as you go down the leading edge, it narrows out. And so I had to add that taper to the leading edge after it was all constructed. And it did take a moment to figure that out because you couldn't just cut it in a nice even taper. The taper had to be in proportion to the dihedral of the wing. And now let me talk about that for a moment. Okay, the issue here comes from the fact that there is a whole lot of information on this plan, and that's basically all the information you get on how to build this plane. So even though I've looked at these plans 100 times, I missed a point related to the dihedral of it. And that has to do with, this represents the spar through the wings. It's the 1/4 inch plywood spar. And right here at the joint between the center section and the outer wing panel is where the dihedral starts. And after a lot of careful measurements, I determined that that's a 7-degree up dihedral at this point here. So the spar is cut up at a 7-degree angle, and it's very obvious to see that the bottom of the wing follows that 7-degree angle up also. You can see here the bottom of the wing follows the 7-degree up. Well, I'm used to planes where the bottom and the top of the wing follow the same dihedral, so I did not pick up on the fact that despite the bottom of the wing going up 7 degrees at this point, the top of the wing stays flat across the entire length of the wing. So once I had things in position with that leading edge, I noticed that the leading edge was canting the wing ribs up at a 7-degree angle, so the top of the wing would have had the same dihedral as the bottom of the wing, and obviously you don't want that with this plan looking the way it does. So I had to rejigger that leading edge. As I said, I had to taper it down from thick here to thin here and do it at the angle that it would maintain a flat surface, a level surface across the whole wing. And by and large, I've been pretty successful with that. When I take and put a straight edge across the top of the wing, it does come out to be pretty much level. There is a little bit of variation. This one that's been sheeted is a lot better. I had to do a little bit of sanding and trimming to the outer ribs out here to get these to be a little shorter in height, and once those 3 ribs are sanded down, then everything is pretty much level here. There's still a little bit of a low area in the center section, and so I'm overcoming that with the thickness of the sheeting. The sheeting for the whole wing is supposed to be 1/16 inch sheeting, and that's what I'm using on the outer panels, but I'm using 3/32 inch sheeting in the center panel to kind of raise it up a little bit and maintain that flat line throughout the whole wing. So the taper and the dihedral were the 2 biggest issues that I encountered. It encountered, again, issues with the lead-out wires not going through at a straight line. We've overcome that, and we'll use the lead-out tubes to make sure that those lead-out wires don't cut into the ribs. We had issues with the joints between the center sections and the outer panels not matching up, and that'll be taken care of with sanding and trimming. And then we had issues with the trailing edge being tapered on the trailing edge of the wing, and the leading edge having a compound taper on it that had to be accommodated for. And then everything had to be rejiggered so the top of the wing was level while maintaining the 7-degree dihedral on the bottom of the wing. So that's what I encountered in doing this. Somebody else may not have missed those in reading the plans, but they were things that I missed, and so I'm going to deal with them. I have dealt with them. The thing that I have to deal with now is putting all the guts of the center section in here, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, so with those issues basically resolved, and again, they may be issues that other people would not have had issue with, but they were things that I missed in the initial survey process of building the wing, but hopefully they'll be overcome and not visible once everything is all built. So the up next to finish this wing off, so to speak, is the lead out tubes that I've talked about. I will cement and block them all in and get them cut and dressed up nice. Then we have to position the gas tanks, or the fuel tanks, in the wings. After that, we have to build a platform and install the bell crank and the lead out wires themselves. And then we'll get into the push rod, and I'm going to be using swivel ball links and these ends for the push rods. This is not new technology, but it's new for me. I've always just used the typical Z end of a push rod, but I'm going to go with the ball links on this. And again, this is new for me. The push rod itself is going to be a carbon push rod, and that again is something I've never used before. Once all the hardware is all and the plumbing is all installed and ready to go, then we'll come back and we'll sheet the center section and the outer wing panel. Again, the outer wing panel is going to be sheeted with 1/16 inch sheet, and then to cover that gap a little bit and get it more of a flat surface across the entire span of the wing, I'm going to use 3/32 inch sheeting across the center section. And at that point, the primary build of the wing will be done, and then I get into sanding and carving, actually carving followed by sanding. And there's going to be a lot of carving and sanding on this wing, especially with the wing tips, which are kind of blocky at this point. If you notice, these were just big balsa blocks, and I've done some rough cutting down, but I've got a lot of shaping and sanding to do on each of the outer wing tips. And then hopefully the wing will be done at that point, enough that I can then move on to the fuselage and start trying to figure all of that out. So that's it. I'm sorry for the lousy camera work. I've got some amateur camera equipment and I'm an amateur at using it. And this wing at 53 inches long is kind of hard to deal with as far as showing things and holding the wing and moving the camera at the same time. So I appreciate your indulgences with my lousy camera work, but hopefully you all got the idea of what I'm trying to do here. So that does it for this particular video, and hopefully you'll stick around and continue as I continue watching as I continue with my build of the Martin B-10 bomber. Thank you and take care. Bye.